For the uninitiated, Super Smash Bros. And Kirby Air Riders share quite a lot of DNA, and that's because they're both the brainchildren of Masahiro Sakurai. The original Kirby games heavily informed Smash 64, that and Melee informed the original Air Ride, and that thread has continued to weave through every major project Sakurai has been involved with since. Given that, paired with the fact that Kirby Air Riders just came out, you might think it'll be a while before we get anything from the source on the next Smash, but to the contrary, after covering Sakurai's games for years and putting literal thousands of hours into them during that time, I can confidently say I already know a lot of what we can expect to see, and it's all hiding in plain sight inside of Kirby Air Riders. The elephant in the room is the arbitrary obstacle that fans, and Sakurai himself to a degree to be clear, has to be clearing the marketing campaign for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate and its "Everyone is Here" tagline. While I maintain the assertion that it would be a bad idea to scale down in a drastic way after coming off of the literal best-selling fighting game ever made, I do acknowledge the Herculean task that will be maintaining such a precedent. That said, I don't think characters even can be the primary focus in the same way. In fact, I'd much prefer there to be at least an option to de-emphasize their inclusion to the point where you can just access all of them out of the box. Or maybe you can draft your starting roster of 8 characters. Something other than the concept of buying a game sold on the promise of being your favorite characters, but needing to use other characters you may not even care about to unlock your favorite character. And even worse, unlocking characters ends up punishing people that care about playing the game the most, being people that compete in and organize tournaments. Unlocking nearly 100 characters, maybe even 100 characters, or in this case more, is a pain in the ass to do even once, but imagine needing to do it multiple times to run tournaments. I get some people think that's the entire fun of a game like Super Smash Bros., playing alone and unlocking all of the things, and that's fair, I guess. But just like every other aspect of Sakurai's games, let me tailor that experience as well. To harken back to Air Riders, for example, this game does also fall short in this department, in my opinion. A starting roster of 4 is just sad. I don't care what year it is or what genre it is. If the value of the game is associated with being specific characters, let me be the character I want from the start. All of that said, if they can't lean on the character roster in the same way that they did with Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, what do they do? Sakurai games do tend to lean a lot on excess, for lack of a better word. So what could they do to make the follow-up to Ultimate seem even more grand after the whole "everyone is here" thing has been done? It's fortunate then that I do think Kirby Air Riders specifically presents an interesting opportunity for the next Smash game, and that's the concept of not just every character returning, or at the very least the roster size being maintained. Again, I'd even bet on it being expanded, but also every major stage, every feature, every mode returning as well. Much in the same way that Top Ride, for example, was brought back and iterated on in Kirby Air Riders. I could see modes from Smash's past, like Adventure Mode, Smash Tour, and Smash Run, which, let's put a pin in that, I have thoughts, to name a few, return and be fleshed out or even reworked entirely for the next Super Smash Bros. Title. I think there's been a lot of developments in the franchise since those modes were cut that could lead to them being much better than they've ever been if they're reintroduced in a real way. Like Smash Tour, with a roster on the same level or better than Ultimate's, could elevate that mode by itself, on top of the fact that making good on past failures seems to be a high priority for this team. I think some of these modes could be redemption stories. I think others would be exciting returns by popular demand, and other modes could be completely reimagined for today's world and become new fan favorites. Events, for example, could work entirely differently with the ubiquity of the internet. Like, we could get a series of event missions at launch, we could then get limited online events post-launch that are referential of current developments like new releases or franchise anniversaries, and we could get new events with DLC characters that are relevant to the characters that we buy, that sort of thing. And I think all of this could benefit greatly from Kirby Air Riders' much improved UI and UX, because Ultimates was not good, but Air Riders actually did a phenomenal job at placing all of its content in places that make sense. Everything is sleek and snappy, the vibes are good, all of that. Now, Smash Run. I think the biggest tragedy of Smash 4's theme of making the two versions distinct was the fact that Smash Run never got to reach its full potential on 3DS, and unlike 8-player Smash, it wasn't brought back in Ultimate to be further fleshed out in a new game. Bringing it back for a Switch 2 Smash game could match or even exceed the potential of that original mode for sure though, since now it would benefit from the current gaming landscape having since embraced similar game types elsewhere. For that reason, amongst others, I think PvPvE is something that Smash could really benefit from as a game that really cares about providing its player base an experience they can tailor to their preferred way to play games. As someone that primarily plays Smash competitively, I also do enjoy playing the game in all of the other ways it has to offer, as it keeps the game fresh. And to be honest with you, understanding how the game works on a casual level is extremely underrated and misunderstood by most competitive and non-competitive players alike. I think competitive Smash Run could go crazy, especially if it inherits Air Riders' approach to the stadium, where you can decide for yourself what challenge to compete in when everything's all said and done, because it would make tailoring your character's attributes to specific skills in the lead up to it more skill-based and more meaningful. On a similar note, I think customization has a lot of untapped potential in Smash games. It'd be a lie to say there's been a lack of trying, but I wouldn't say they nailed it just yet, and that's true equally for cosmetics and gameplay, sans controls. More important of those two, in my opinion, would be the cosmetics in this case. In Kirby Air Riders, there are unlockable accessories that are usable for every character in the game, whereas Smash only has cosmetic customization for Mii fighters, which I personally think is a huge waste. I think there's plenty of potential for additional alts, and if the barrier to doing so for every character is the work needed to model and rig them, I'm sure most people wouldn't be opposed to paying a few bucks for cosmetics for their favorite characters. They don't need to go full Fortnite or even necessarily as far as Rivals of Aether 2, but I do think they could do more than what they do currently. Honestly, I think it would even be cool if they handled it exactly like Air Riders does, where there's a set of universal accessories that every character could use. They can use the Smash Brothers tactic of referencing iconic accessories from all of the represented franchise and make them equipable for every character in the game. To take it even further, user-created content has been elevated in Kirby Air Riders as well. The amount of thoughtful franchise representation on display in the online machine marketplace could potentially be taken to an entirely different stratosphere if applied to Super Smash Bros. By way of custom colorways for characters, for example. Beyond that, they could potentially breathe new life into legacy modes like Break the Targets if they allowed the community to create their own target breaking challenges to download and complete for other players online. I also think user-created event matches have a ton of potential here as well. There's so many interesting ideas that get left on the table because you can only fit but so much into a project before the deadline comes. Things gotta release eventually, but if you open the door to the community post-launch, they'll make sure those ideas see the light of day one way or another. And there's obviously the option to continue to iterate on stage creation and the video creation tools, but if I'm honest, I don't think either of those things would be as interesting as including these new opportunities for the community to create. I mentioned the idea of bringing back adventure mode at the top of the video, but to elaborate, there's always this lingering question of whether Subspace Emissary could make a return, and to answer that question here with my current thoughts, I still don't see it. Not in the same way at the very least. I think its value has been redirected to the character reveals, and although I do see a world where the character reveal videos are changed a bit to tell an interconnected story and only partially released in the lead up to the game, I don't think Sakurai feels any different about the idea of people sharing them online, spoiling the experience and therefore not being worth it to some. I personally don't agree agree with this idea, as plenty of games that's entire value as a product hinge on the story are released, and most seem to avoid being spoiled there. But at the end of the day, he's the game director. An opinion like that is enough to cut the feature entirely. I will say though that the idea of using these cosmetics to tell a story instead of essentially being long form Easter eggs could lead to something special, in my opinion. And I would like to see the structure of Subspace Emissary return with enhanced gameplay by way of including some of the ideas from World of Light. I still can't speak to Air Riders road trip mode since I'm still saving my experience with that for a Twitch stream in the future, but I suspect some of the ideas present in that mode serve as a single player focused thesis statement on what the game has to offer, and I think a revamped Subspace Emissary could do the same for Smash. Not to say a World of Light approach couldn't do the same, but I will say, anecdotally, that mode felt like a chore for me to play. And I'll also add, I do miss the ability to play through Subspace Emissary with a friend. That alone is enough to make me want that mode to return, even if it ends up being more scaled down like the original adventure mode in Melee is in comparison. And it's worth acknowledging that the core of Smash is a platformer. I think it's a bit of a waste to not utilize that foundation to create some unique platforming challenges within the Smash Brothers framework. On the topic of that framework, let's talk gameplay mechanics. I'm not in the camp that believes Smash needs to or would even benefit from reinventing the wheel on the core gameplay. There's definitely a place for that when a franchise loses its way, but Smash is quite literally bigger than it's ever been. The vast majority of people that played Super Smash Bros. Ultimate were thoroughly satisfied with it, but much like with Kirby Air Riders, there's always room for improvement. There's absolutely characters that could use a rework, characters that have been here from the very beginning like Mario, Samus, or Donkey Kong, to name a few, that could all stand to get some new moves and mechanics that better represent some of their newer titles. We don't need Super Smash Bros. To be entirely rebooted for that sort of thing to happen. In addition to that, the overall speed of the game could be adjusted, and there's a few directions they could take just based on Switch 2's capabilities to further improve the game without needing to completely reinvent the wheel. Would 120 frames per second be worth exploring, or would they value hitting a higher resolution at 60 frames? Or what about the other standout Switch 2 feature, namely mouse mode? I don't think it's exactly applicable, but maybe they could use it for the credits minigame, which could also have some sort of everything is here spin, being an amalgamation of the previous minigames from past Super Smash Bros. Credit scenes. Maybe they could add support for menu navigation with mouse mode, or bring back that top ride reference bumper mode that's in the 3DS version of Super Smash Bros. But I do sincerely doubt that they'll do anything like that, because there's not even any touch support in any of the other Sakurai developed Switch games, so I don't see why they would embrace an even newer functionality that doesn't apply to the core gameplay when they didn't even touch that one. Even beyond what can be found in Kirby Air Riders, I have a lot more ideas on the overall direction for the future of Super Smash Bros. That you can hear by clicking the video on your screen right now. Thank you to paid members over at shop.watchredirect.com like Trev L. Steinberg for making this video possible. Hit the link in the description to join them in the credits of every video and in receiving physical and digital perks.